Should foreign firms mind their own business over China's politics? They're coming under pressure from Beijing for making political comments it considers sensitive. Some have had to apologize for voicing sympathy with Hong Kong protesters or face the consequences. So where does that leave freedom of speech? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Peter Dobby. China has long been sensitive about what's said at home and controls everything that could affect its image. Now foreign businesses are feeling the heat. China's message is watch what you say if you want to do business here, or pay the price. And that could prove costly for many companies, particularly from the United States, that do rely on the Chinese market. They've been vulnerable to boycotts from Chinese consumers and pressured by state media and online platforms too. Content considered sensitive ranges from sympathy with protesters in Hong Kong to adverts seen as racist. And the latest row with the US National Basketball Association, or NBA, has raised concerns over freedom of speech. So let's look now for the next moment or so at the companies that have bowed to Chinese pressure. The NBA faced fury from Beijing after a team official tweeted support for protesters in Hong Kong. The association apologized after China threatened to stop broadcasting games as partners began to cut ties. The US tech giant Apple removed an app used to track police movements in Hong Kong at the request of Beijing. It also deleted the Taiwan flag emoji for users in Hong Kong and Macau. The US satirical TV show South Park faced censorship in China after taking aim at its human rights record. The US video game maker Activision Blizzard suspended a gamer after he voiced support for the protesters in Hong Kong. And some fashion brands have been boycotted for identifying Hong Kong and Taiwan as countries. OK, let's bring our panel. Joining us from Singapore on Skype is Victor Tao, an assistant professor at the China Studies Programme at the University of Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, on Skype, Joseph Cheng, a convener at the Alliance for a True Democracy. And finally, also in Singapore, on Skype as well, is Drew Thompson, a visiting senior research fellow at the National University of Singapore. Welcome to you all. Victor Tao in Singapore, coming to you first. Why has the rhetoric surrounding this issue always been so very harsh?
Well, I think this is consistent with China's long-standing policy that Hong Kong, like Taiwan and Tibet and other places that China has sensitivities over, is a part of China, and China has always taken a very tough stance towards anything that it perceives as separatism. So in this case, the tweet, the support for the Hong Kong democratization is seen as by the Chinese to be an infringement of Chinese sovereignty. And that's why the Chinese government is coming to so hard. I think it's to preempt international opinion. But having said that, the Chinese have always behaved that way, regardless of what. In fact, they have been very consistent. So they have done the same thing with the Americans at times, the Japanese, the Filipinos, South Koreans, and the Norwegians at times when they are unhappy with over issues. So this is not anything that is very surprising, really.
Joseph Cheng in Hong Kong, when it comes to image, how concerned is the central government in Beijing?
Very, very much concerned, because China is the largest trading country in the world. It has to sell its goods, and it is very conscious of its image, and the whole party apparatus is ready to be mobilized to protect it. The general approach, of course, is, are you a friend of China? And if you're a friend, you must not criticize China and damage its image. But if you are not a friend, you criticize China, then the party apparatus will mobilize the entire apparatus to exert pressure on you. And it is very difficult for a single government or a single NGO or corporation to resist that force. The Chinese authorities would likely impose sanctions to create a deterrence effect.
Drew Thompson in Singapore. What are the main pressure points in these individual relationships here between the Chinese government, people, companies that work with the Chinese government, and companies outside of China?
Well, I think companies outside of China that have sought to do business in China have always recognized that they would have to follow Chinese rules and norms when operating in China. And that's just been accepted since the beginning of reform and opening. What's changed, and has changed relatively recently, is China's effort to export its form of politics and its form of governance abroad, to then pay attention to how companies behave externally. And that's new, because that then runs up against other countries and other companies' own values. And now companies are forced to choose between their values or their country's values and China's, which can be vastly different.
Victor Tao in Singapore. We'll get onto the NBA aspect of this in just a moment. First, though, Apple. Now, Apple is a multi-billion-dollar international company. It clearly has a relationship with Beijing. Is that relationship good for Apple or good for Beijing?
I think so far it's been good for both countries. I mean, both Apple and as well as China. Chinese consumers enjoy Apple products very much, and Apple is making a hefty profit in China. And the relationship, is rosy for a large part. The app that is being pulled actually tracks the Hong Kong police whereabouts and deployment. So from the Hong Kong police perspective, this is actually endangering Hong Kong police officers, because it enables the more violent rioters to be able to track where the police are and to avoid them, and to move to places where the police presence is light, and to continue the trail of destruction. So I think it would be fair to say that Apple has actually done the correct thing here.
Joseph Cheng, let's just put that, Victor, to Joseph Cheng in Hong Kong. Joseph, on that idea of the app, because that's what Victor in Singapore is talking about. If you've got 243 million iPhone users in China, if their conduit for information about accurate, truthful news is one app on the App Store, i.e. that one app becomes a portal to reality and what's really going on outside the country. Okay, it's good for Beijing, it's good for Apple, it's not good for the users of Apple products inside China.
Certainly so. I differ with the former speaker. You see, the apps and the messages, the information offered by the app are found to be rather useful for ordinary people in Hong Kong, because obviously people want to know where the troubles are, and they want to avoid those trouble spots. I want to go to dinner, I want to go to visit my friend. Obviously, I have to alter my plan if the police gathers at that spot, if there are clashes with the police at that spot. And it is significant to note that actually the Hong Kong government and the Hong Kong police force did not offer any objections. The objections come from the Chinese authorities. The Chinese authorities obviously are very sensitive about the situation in Hong Kong, and it wants to exert pressure on Apple again to create a demonstration effect and a deterrence effect. The Chinese authorities are aware that the protesters successfully raised money through crowdfunding to try to influence international public opinion shortly before the Donald Trump Xi Jinping summit in Osaka in the latter half of June. And they again did the same thing on National Day, again to articulate their position and to criticize China. So China is very sensitive about the situation in Hong Kong.
Drew Thompson in Singapore, coming back to you. If we are in effect saying that the Chinese authorities lean on either other governments and or companies from other countries, how do they do it? I mean, what are the specifics that they indulge in?
So, I mean, obviously the Chinese government has multiple means for influencing the decisions made both within China and without. Obviously, their first preference would be persuasion, would be to have self-censorship, have companies understand what the limits are and not cross those lines. So that's the number one preference. But when that doesn't work, they can use more coercion. They can mobilize public sentiment. They can make an example out of a company. I mean, it's worth noting with this NBA issue that there was one tweet out of probably millions on Hong Kong that, keeping in mind that Twitter is also banned in China, that the Chinese government decided to take this one tweet that can't even be seen by the Chinese people and make a case out of it. So clearly the NBA was made an example of, just as many other companies have been made examples of as well. So they can put a lot of pressure both by isolating companies, making examples of them, and then threatening their access to the market. I think it was remarkable how they could quickly mobilize not just society and the number of Chinese internet users to express their displeasure with the NBA, but then to affect all of the private companies in China to end their marketing or to end their broadcasting rights. That's a really, to me, very shocking demonstration of their ability to control all aspects of their economy and society. And it really raises the question about what is a private company in China anymore if everyone is beholden to the government like this. So to me, this has demonstrated just a tremendous capability to coerce, and something that should be of concern to any other company that hasn't yet been made an example of.
Victor Tao in Singapore. OK, let's talk about the NBA story. Clearly, at some point, Daryl Morey, who's the boss of the Houston Rockets NBA team, he put out this tweet. He deleted it. So somebody managed to get the message to him, or they chose to message him and say, or they had an email conversation or whatever, and they said, the tweet has got to go because you will cost us money. Is it a little bit sinister that that message was relayed to him and he reacted in precisely the right way, but that message came presumably through cyberspace from thousands of kilometers away in some dark, smoky office in Beijing?
Well, certainly. I mean, we cannot be expecting that the Chinese will do anything less than that. Like I said, they have been very consistent, and that's the way they have behaved. But having said that, I would just put this as a small blip on a long series of things. And the reason I say this is because the NBA, unlike other companies, there is only one NBA, and there's only so much leverage the Chinese government has over the NBA. The fans are still dying to watch NBA matches. You know, as far as I know, I think the exhibition match is still going on, and you know the fans have packed the stadium. People are still watching the matches. I don't think you can take away the enthusiasm of the Chinese people's for basketball just like that. I think the point here is the Chinese government is singling out the NBA because the NBA has exceptional influence in China. It's like Apple. You know, these are organizations which the Chinese government considers to be extremely influential in the domestic market. And I guess that's why the Chinese censors are actually paying more attention to these organizations. Having said that, I think it's okay for the NBA managers to express their support for democratic aspirations. But having said that, it would be nice if the managers could also say something about the rioting that is going on in Hong Kong. I think that will calm the Chinese government down, because you want to be even-handed in your comments and not say, yeah, we support whatever is Hong Kong, regardless of what they are doing. That's not the message I think the Chinese government want to see. If there were expressions of support for perhaps a return to a more stable and law and order situation, I think the Chinese government will actually appreciate it. So would the Hong Kong government. And I think a lot of Hong Kong people would actually appreciate that as well.
Drew, can I come back to you for a second, for the next minute or so? Is what we're talking about here the Chinese government's ability to, either explicitly or implicitly, or by using channels of communication here, they are monetizing reputational damage?
Well, I'm not sure in this case how much they're monetizing, because it's hard to see who's a winner in this case, because many Chinese companies are going to suffer because of this, right? The companies involved in marketing the NBA within China. And again, fans will be disappointed. I think the other aspect that shouldn't be, and as Victor pointed out, that many of those fans are going to continue to find ways to watch NBA games, which may include using VPNs and circumventing Chinese censorship so they can continue to watch their favorite sports, because there is no comparison between the NBA and any other sports league, any other basketball league. So in some ways, this move has a lot of risk for the Chinese government. And I'm not sure if the risk is going to be equivalent to the reward that they'll get by laying the claim to dictate the terms of discussion about Hong Kong.
Joseph Cheng in Hong Kong. Is this debate tilting in the right direction? For the first time ever, the US Commerce Department has blacklisted 28 companies/individuals very specifically over human rights, and they've actually used the phrase, they've talked about human rights, they've talked about it as being a priority.
Well, the Donald Trump administration now tries to use various issues to exert pressure on China in the trade negotiations, including South China Sea issue, Taiwan issue, now the human rights Xinjiang issue, and also the Hong Kong issue. We are still not too sure whether the Donald Trump administration will really exert serious sanctions on China because of these human rights violations in Xinjiang. The violations are obvious. The international community calls for sanctions or at least actions against the Chinese authorities. Yet Western countries, including the United States, are not yet prepared to take very, very tough measures. The proposed measures on the part of the Donald Trump administration at this stage are warnings more rather than actual actions designed to protect human rights in China. It is speculated that Donald Trump are using various issues, including the human rights issues in Xinjiang, to try to exert pressure on China. And if the Donald Trump administration secures what it desires, what it wants from the trade negotiations, one wonders if these human rights issues will still be pursued by the Donald Trump administration. Certainly, one can expect more from the US Congress, especially on the issue of Hong Kong, on the issue of human rights and democracy in Hong Kong.
Victor Tao, they have now started their 13th round of trade talks. If there was a real rebalancing of this relationship that involves semi-closed market offset against a totally open market, if Beijing got what it wanted in that regard and the US was prepared to go with that, does the United States have to accept that what we're talking about today, in one sense, I guess, kind of what we're saying is, this is just how China does consumerism, like it or lump it?
Well, I really don't think that this is the United States has to accept anything it doesn't want to. And having said that, we all know that if the moment Donald Trump steps down and the next administration comes in, things will change. So I don't think that it's going to be anything that is really a sort of a permanent arrangement that is going to be put in place, really. It's just really for the moment and what I guess the Trump administration can squeeze out of for political mileage insofar when China is concerned. I'm optimistic that this is not going to be permanent. It's going to be an arrangement insofar where it pleases both sides.
When we talk about both sides there, Drew Thompson in Singapore, first 8 months of this year, according to the World Bank, China invested $70 billion in overseas projects. It's got 53 countries involved in its so-called Belt and Road projects across from East Asia, Far East Asia, up and across and towards Europe and down into Africa. $70 billion worth of investment. Does that buy you an awful lot of, you've got to be on message, otherwise you don't get the cash, you don't get the investment, you don't get the infrastructure projects that your country needs?
Peter, let me back up a minute and go back to the issue that Joseph had mentioned about Xinjiang, because I think I'd like to provide a slightly different perspective. On the one hand, it's tempting to see U.S. actions in pursuit of its interest as all working towards some grand goal of putting trade pressure on China. But I think the action that we just saw take place earlier this week on Xinjiang was really, I think, a sign of the frustration that's felt by the administration and by Congress. Congress has been calling for the U.S. to take action on this issue, on the detention of over 1 million Muslims in Western China. And the United States has now finally done something. They've named names. They've identified the public security ministries that are responsible. They've identified the companies that have been facilitating this program, and they've required any U.S. company exporting to them to obtain a license, which will provide greater exposure, greater transparency into the process, and hopefully stir a little more debate. Now, also, the State Department has followed up by issuing an announcement that these people and these companies are not going to be able to obtain visas going to the United States. So you now have a situation where the United States is making the perpetrators of this horrific actions pariahs. And that the U.S. is the first country that's actually stepped up to do this. And again, it's been called for quite some time within the U.S. government, particularly within Congress. So I'm not sure that this is all linked to the trade issue. It's definitely linked to American outrage, and specifically to this case.
Joseph Cheng in Hong Kong. Sorry, pardon me, Drew, carry on.
Just getting back to your question about the Belt and Road, I mean, I think the Belt and Road provides a certain amount of leverage to China dealing with other countries, particularly in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and it certainly has worked to its advantage. There is a high demand for investment in infrastructure, but I think Chinese companies have not necessarily demonstrated their ability to provide quality or to provide good terms for these loans. So in some ways, I think companies and countries are becoming much more aware of the potential pitfalls of Belt and Road programs and are getting smarter about it. And I think the smart thing for the United States is not to oppose it, but to support good quality projects and to enable those countries that are recipients to actually benefit from them.
Okay, very briefly, Joseph, because we are trotting towards the end of Inside Story. Will outside minds outside China become more focused on this when, for example, the pension plans of 5 million US federal employees, it's about $50 billion in a pension fund, according to the Washington Post last week, they are being funneled or tilted or pushed towards investment funds in China. Those investment funds fund companies that make guns. If those guns are used to kill people on the streets of Hong Kong, say in a year or two, or they fund the departments that round up 1.5 million Uyghurs for, quotes, re-education, that may not go down terribly well with US voters.
Certainly so. The United States remains a democratic country. Public opinion is important. And what the Chinese authorities have been doing have alerted the American public that their basic core values have been challenged, and they demand a response. And I think the Chinese authorities have lost sight of their actual provocations of the American political culture in the long term. Certainly, the Chinese approach in exerting pressure on American corporations in violating human rights will not help to improve and maintain long-term good relations with the United States. The price is going to be high.
Okay, in 30 seconds of an answer, please, Victor Tao in Singapore. Beijing has been quite measured so far. Which way do you think that reaction will carry on going?
I think they will continue to be conservative and they will watch what they're doing. They are very mindful of what's going on. And I think the regime wants to come across as being responsible. But at the same time, they want to make sure that they are able to hold on to power. They are able to make sure that they maintain national integrity, meaning Hong Kong, Taiwan, and all these other places that are very sensitive about stays in a family. So they will continue to be conservative and measured.
Gentlemen, we must leave it there. Thank you to our guests. They were Victor Tao, Joseph Cheng, and Drew Thompson. And thank you, too, for your company. You can see the programme again anytime on the website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. I'm also @PeterDobby1 from me, Peter Dobby, and the entire team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.